Hello. Welcome. We are pleased to host an exhibition and artist talk by Tammy Harrington, funded by the Catherine Hyde Trust. Harrington is a printmaker and paper cut artist that imbues the cross-cultural influences of Chinese and American culture into figurative compositions. She was born in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and currently resides in Russellville, Arkansas. She received an MFA, a BFA in printmaking from the University of South Dakota, and an MFA in printmaking from Wichita State University. Harrington is currently a professor of art at the University of the Ozarks, where she received the Bagwell Outstanding Faculty Award in 2013 and 2018. She has exhibited artwork throughout the region and nationally. She serves as the president of the Arkansas Society of Printmakers and was awarded the 2017 award from the River Valley Arts Center. It is my pleasure to welcome Tammy Harrington, and I'm going to turn it over to her. Tammy, can you hear me?
I can't unmute.
I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right, great. All right.
Okay, good, thank you.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Tammy Harrington. I'm so glad that you're able to join me today for my talk about my show. Unfortunately, I'm not able to be there in person, but I'm more than happy to tell you about, how art is a part of my journey. So the title of this talk is Art and Identity, and really talking about the ability art had for me to figure out who I was. I was able to find out more about thinking about what revelations happened in my life to give me more clarity and awareness. And they were usually unexpected because they were just these different events that happened. And once I got into college, I really started thinking about who I was. And so I will move forward. So the question is, what makes a person? If I were to describe myself, what would I mention first? Is it about the logistics or the stats, right? Am I talking about my gender, my race, my age, where I live, what's my profession, my ethnicity, or am I talking about my personality, what I like or dislike? If I were to think about the census or some kind of survey, I would be a married 47-year-old Chinese American woman living in Arkansas, working as an art professor. But that doesn't really say much about what I think or what I feel or what I've experienced in life. And what is my sense of humor, or what do I think is important? So how do I navigate the world? And I think that's oftentimes something that young people or all people really think about. What is my place in this world and what do I want to say? Especially if you're interested in moving on in art as a profession, that's oftentimes the hardest thing to find out or figure out is, what am I going to make art about when I don't have an assignment, when it's not already laid out for you? And so when I work with my college students, that is usually the biggest revelation they have, is figuring out what they want to do. And so I'll give you a little bit of history and background. So as was mentioned, I am from South Dakota. And so here's a map of it. In case you are not familiar with South Dakota is, especially for those of us that are living in Arkansas, it's pretty up north, almost Canada. I consider it to be home. I lived there for 24 years until I moved away to attend graduate school. Oftentimes, the people I meet will ask me where I'm from, and I automatically say my hometown, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And especially since I live in Arkansas and I don't necessarily have a Southern accent, I think that's what they're assuming, is I'm not from around here. And it also holds a very sentimental place in my heart, even though I've lived almost as long in Arkansas as I have lived in South Dakota. The second layer, though, to that question is they're not really asking me where I'm from, meaning South Dakota or the town I live in, Russellville. They're really thinking about what my physical appearance is, and I am Asian. And so they are asking really, where do my people come from? What is my ethnic background? What is my heritage? So that's an interesting thing to ponder, right? Because I'm talking about identity. And so I already identify as an Asian American, but I really consider myself to be very much an American because I was born here and raised here. But sometimes that's not necessarily the case in terms of perception and interpretation. So this is me back in 4th grade. And also, I think I'm a little bit younger over on the right. In South Dakota, there's lots of snow. So my 2 sisters and I. And so my parents were immigrants from Hong Kong, and they arrived in the United States in 1966. And my 2 sisters and I were actually born in the United States. We were born in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and really knew nothing different for a long time. In addition to, I guess, the American component of me, I don't have a very Chinese sounding name at all. When I was born, my parents wanted to give all of us very Americanized names. So my oldest sister is Julie, my middle sister is Mary, and then I'm Tammy. In fact, Tammy Lynn, which actually sounds very Southern, but my last name was Yu. My name currently now is Harrington because I'm married. So it's interesting that there's that perception of, with my name and possibly the way that my voice sounds, you necessarily wouldn't attach that I have any kind of Asian heritage. I lived in South Dakota, which is not necessarily a hotbed of Chinese culture. It's a very predominantly Caucasian world, especially back in the 70s. The largest minority population were the Native Americans, the Lakota Sioux. The city I grew up in was a pretty good size, about 80,000 people. So it's not a small town. It's not the biggest town, but it had several schools, several elementary schools, several junior high and high schools. And even with this size city, in my elementary school, I was usually the only Asian kid in my grade level. So at my school, there were kindergarten through 6th grade, and there were 2 classes in each grade. So I was the Asian kid, and my sister, who was a year older than me, was the Asian kid in that group. And sometimes you would have another one, but it was more of an anomaly just because there weren't not as high of a Chinese or Asian population. Although I don't feel like I was singled out in a negative way. I felt like I always fit in, but I did have a physical difference from most of the people in my class. So, thinking back to it on it now, it seemed more like my economic status or, what clothes you wore or what things you had were more of an influence, especially once you hit into junior high and high school. So from these pictures, you can see that I'm living in a mixed world. So at home, I lived a very Chinese existence, or as Chinese as you can be in South Dakota. So my grandmother lived with us, so you can see her on the right. So I have 2 sisters, my parents, my grandmother living with us in the home. And that's a very ethnic thing that happens. In fact, right now where I live, my parents live with us, or we all live together. And I ate rice every day. I had my bowl and I had my chopsticks, and we would eat all our dinners that way. We still would have forks, spoons, and knives and things like that, but typically those were used at breakfast or at a different time at lunch. Although I do love all the snacks that are American, especially potato chips. You can see that the furnishings are very American, 70s style, but you can see sprinkled throughout my house are little accents of Chineseness. So on the picture at the left, you can see there's that Chinese lantern hanging, and there's also these little tchotchkes or knickknacks sitting on our TV. And you also, on the picture on the right, you see the Chinese characters and the pillows that are satin with embroidery. But notice how I'm also dressed very Americanized. We didn't live our existence wearing Chinese styled clothes. So this began my journey as being a Chinese American. Since my parents worked a lot, they were working at a Chinese American restaurant. And I would say this is one of the few places that you could actually go and get chicken chow mein and egg rolls in combination with a cheeseburger and a milkshake. So it was an interesting combination for a restaurant. My parents worked all the time. And so since they were away from home quite a bit, I really dove into watching television and absorbing American culture that way. And I think all humans also feel the need to get to fit in and to acclimate to your environment so that you feel that you're part of a larger culture. So I'm going to fast forward to college. This is an image that I created when I was in grad school. So I think when I started trying to figure out who I was already married at the time, and I moved away from home. So I was about 13 hours away from home. There's no way I would be able to drive back home on a weekend to get my fix of my family and the food and who they are. So this was really me and my husband living in Wichita, Kansas. And I wanted to start thinking about who I was. Before this, I did a lot of investigative artwork that was tied into female identity or female roles in society, but not necessarily things tied to myself. So this is one of my first self-portrait works in printmaking. So this is a relief linoleum, which is the tornado, and then a piece of wood that I printed as well in relief. And this one place is called Different State of Mind, Kansas. And so I think this is really important for me because it describes how I felt. I felt a little turbulent. I felt a little uneasy. I didn't feel like I was maybe at home, even though I was, I was going to school there. So my mind was in turbulence, and then the tornado is a very apt symbol for Kansas. So I would say that in Missouri as well, there's lots of tornadoes that come through the area. There's another description or another artwork that I did. And I'm really starting to look at my physical appearance as an Asian person, as a Chinese person, and noticing the different physical attributes that made me who I was, but also made me more Asian. I started thinking about what made, besides the roundness of my nose and the broadness of it, it was really just the eye sockets, right? If you're not aware of it, the look for an Asian person and the reason why they have a more almond-shaped eye is the eyeballs are actually pushed forward in the eye socket, which means there's less room for eyelids. And so that's why Asian people look Asian primarily. And so, but I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my artwork. Once again, we didn't have any assignments, so I had to figure out what I want to do on my own. So when I look at myself or think about myself as a Chinese American, it's essentially a mixed ethnicity and heritage. How do I do this? I'm not overtly Chinese acting, whatever that means. No accent. I didn't wear Chinese clothing. Sometimes I cooked Chinese food, but I also cooked American food or Italian or whatever else we felt like having. I was married to someone who is not Asian. He is Caucasian. He's a white guy. Was I becoming diluted in my Chineseness? And is that okay? Is that fair? Is that a shame? I mean, oftentimes I'm asked a lot if I speak Chinese, and I really don't speak very much Chinese. Growing up, I can understand it, but I feel very awkward speaking it. So there's the quandary. Can I be Chinese enough, or am I very much Americanized, or can I be both? And so there's also a stereotypical image of a Chinese woman, right, at the right, the picture on the right. to where, you know, we both have the same physical appearance, but this person is wearing Chinese clothing style. And sometimes it becomes more of an icon or a symbol, right? Someone who is soft, demure, and exteriors, belly, great inner strength, tolerance, and perseverance, which is a quote from Zhang Li. And also in Chinese society, second best to males, which I don't know if I necessarily feel like I'm that either. But one time I had a neighbor when I lived in where I live now in Arkansas, came down, and he wasn't necessarily expecting this more soft, genteel Asian person, but instead he was expecting to be more loud and maybe somewhat obnoxious, like in King of the Hill, Min, who was Khan's wife, who was a very loud, abrasive personality. So once again, you've got the whole perception of Asianness in society or in culture, perhaps being projected on me, but that's not necessarily who I am. So to think about, how do I depict Chineseness in myself? I didn't want to use a dragon symbol at the left, although I do enjoy the artwork, but I didn't feel like I had a connection to it because I didn't necessarily grow up with a lot of this imagery or specific imagery, or maybe it just didn't connect to me as a person. And I think what's interesting too is I was born in the United States and I grew up in a Chinese household, so I feel like I'm very Chinese American. When there are students that come from China to study at school, they were born in China. They grew up in that Chinese culture. They had that Chinese existence. And so I didn't necessarily click with them either because they had different type of upbringing and different expectations and different workings with society. When I went to Hong Kong to visit family in 4th grade, that's where actually the picture was, in Hong Kong. Something that made me feel more disjointed when I started thinking about it. Hong Kong was under British rule, so they did have some American or more Western traits, but it was still very much an Asian experience. And when I met my distant relative of some kind, I'm not sure who she was, she seemed a little dismayed at perhaps my sisters and I, you know, wanting to eat McDonald's in Hong Kong, which of course now I wouldn't try to eat McDonald's in Hong Kong. But at one point we were going up an elevator because there's a lot of big high rises, and she essentially almost kind of cornered me or talked to me in a very abrasive way and said, like, you are not Chinese because you don't speak Chinese. And for me, as a little 4th grader, that really stung. And I think it still stings me to this day, because for her, the interpretation of Chineseness was that you have to speak Chinese and live Chinese. But that was different for me because I grew up in America, and that wasn't so much stress. I think my parents would have liked me to speak more Chinese, but that just through the course of, you know, them working so much, and I went to, you know, English speaking schools, I embraced that more, also because I wanted to fit in. And so I think that's something that a lot of young people can think about now, because I think as we move through society, there are more people that are live 2 existences as being like Chinese American or African American, or they also can be multiracial or biracial. So my children, I have 2 of them, are half white and half Chinese, and one is more Chinese looking than the other, and it has, you know, caused them some tension, and then also some well, I would say confusion. Like my daughter, who was a very confident person, is also very confident of who she is as a white and a Chinese person. But she does have more features that lean more towards lighter skin and not as Asian looking. And someone had said something that was very racial, and something that was very that was improper to say. And so she objected to that. And the person talked to her and said, like, oh, wait, I forgot that you're Chinese. So there's that whole thing of identity, which one do I belong to? And in fact, sometimes I don't know if I belong to either one. I don't know if I necessarily fit fully in the American world, but I don't know if I fully fit in the Chinese world. But how do I depict that in my artwork? So when in graduate school, I started researching and I found these Chinese paper cuts. So if you've been through my show or you saw my first piece, I'm really influenced by the style. It still has a very much of a level of Chineseness with the folk simplified style, but I think it also connects with my printmaking background, like that linoleum that I showed you earlier with the tornado. I think that has a very similar look to that. So I was really excited to find these Chinese paper cuts. I love the crisp appearance, the stylization, plus on top of that, I really loved that there was folklore and symbolism, icon, and superstition and mythology tied into it. Because I think in terms of, I think every person or every family or every culture have certain superstitions. When I was growing up, my grandmother would only allow me to put red, black, or brown barrettes in my hair or hair ties, because if I put any other color, especially white, that was going to be bad luck. And because white in Chinese culture is a color to be worn for funerals, as opposed to in American culture, brides wear white. But in Asian culture, brides wear red instead. And in fact, I had a red car for a long time because it was considered the lucky color. And so it's interesting what sticks with you as you grow older. And so here's some other examples of the Chinese folk art of paper cut. And so paper cut essentially grew out of a way to decorate the house in a cheap and efficient way. So you could take a stack of red paper that was really thin and cut through it with sharp knives and have openings in it. So when they would put them on the windows, which were paper at the time, you could still let light in, but you could decorate the house at the same time. And these are the Chinese zodiac animals. Another aspect I really liked too was the Chinese textiles or the clothing, because I feel like I had a connection to it. My parents would oftentimes get these care packages from Hong Kong or from China, and it was almost as if they were sending Chineseness my way, little bits of Chineseness, because they would have some Chinese clothing, there would be Chinese food and candy, and then what's most remarkable is they send us videotapes with all these Chinese television shows and other events recorded on it. So we could, and at this time, satellite dishes were not as common, so they would not be able to view these kind of shows. So they'd have to wait for the care package to come. But I liked the theatrical nature and the patterning and the design of the clothing that was used in the theatrical television shows and movies, but also in the traditional court attire from the past. Plus, it has also an enhanced idea of femininity as well. So this piece here is, you can see that I've got the influence of the Chinese paper cut in the background, and but this is a picture of me where I've applied my Chineseness with the hair and the makeup and the clothing. So now I am very embedded in my Chineseness. The title of this is called Oriental Princess, and it ties into another event in my life where I was made aware of, how sometimes I didn't quite necessarily fit in or perception. I was out at the bar, and it was, at a dance club, and I was wearing a very Americanized outfit. I was wearing almost like preppy schoolgirl kind of outfit with a plaid skirt and some, just a matching top. And when he talked to me, the guy, he says like, well, you look like a little Oriental princess. And so that was very shocking because I'm like, what? what are you describing me? Because I didn't look dressed like this here. But to him, because of my Asian appearance, he wanted to attach that title of Oriental Princess. So I held on to that for a long time, and I titled this piece that way. Now that I found a direction in my work, I started exploring the whole idea of maybe the two Tammys, the American Tammy and the Chinese Tammy, and also incorporating not only the makeup and the clothing, but then some of the patterning that I saw. I created this piece on the right, not realizing that I was also very influenced by pop art, which is the image at the left from Liechtenstein. So you can see that it's very colorful, flat and bright, and not really anything like what I had done previously. So the person on the left, my Chinese Tammy, it doesn't even matter who the person is underneath, but since I put this layer of Chinese appearance on myself, I've become more Chinese. The person on the right is what I call the American Tammy, and doesn't really have any kind of distinguishing features except for I really enhanced the yellowness of my skin, right? Because Asian people tend to have more yellowish tones, but not obviously this extreme. But I wanted to push that. Well, even though I am not dressed necessarily in Chinese attire, I still have that perception or that appearance. This is a piece where I started integrating. The piece on the left is my inspiration, and the piece on the right is my version of the young boy sitting on a fish. So that's my son sitting on a fish. So the fish is representing wealth and abundance, and the peach shape is representing long life, as well as happiness and longevity. So I really started thinking about, okay, what kind of symbols or what kind of patterns do I want to use to incorporate in my pieces. So this is kind of starting my journey into what my work looks like now. So I have a drawing where I've actually cut paper and laid on top of it. So combining my two worlds. So I would consider like the drawings more like my American world, the depiction of who I am, my role as a mother with my son, but then I laid in those Chinese influences where I use the flowers to represent femininity. In the corners, you can see that they are hearts, so representing my love for my child. And if you look really closely around my son's head is this tiger. So they, in Chinese culture, would have these bibs or these neck pieces that you could put around your child to protect the child from the evil spirits. So I thought that was really interesting. You know, once again, incorporating the whole idea of superstition. So what is important about this piece is really this is the starting point for what my work looks like now. It's important for you as artists, if you want to continue on with it, is to find your people, to find people that are like-minded in terms of making art and thinking critically about what it's saying. And so I meet with a group of female artists. Most of them are teaching at college, but we're spread out. And we get together to socialize, but we also get together to critique artwork, each other's artwork, to get feedback. And that's really something very important to hold on to when you move on to wherever you move on. You go on to college trying to find your people in the art program, if that's the direction you want to go. And then especially after you graduate from college, holding on to that as well. But she suggested, instead of just using, like you can see on this one here, I just use the red to symbolize the Chineseness. She asked, why don't you just go ahead and cut into your prints? Make paper cuts out of that, or make paper cuts out of other surfaces besides the red, the lucky color. So that's what I went ahead and tried here. So the figure here is me in one of my prints, but I have totally shifted and really incorporated the paper cut into my physical appearance. And so this pattern that's on my face is of clouds from a Chinese textile that I found. And so you can see that Hello? I think I lost. Can you still see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So with this piece here, I went ahead and applied different patterns. And I feel that this really was a turning point in my work. My next piece is starting to combine more colors and more different versions. And when I didn't realize this when I was making it, it almost seems as if I'm trying to capture myself in this space between reality and imagination, or between my Chinese and Americanness, because I'm not necessarily Chinese all the time, but I'm not American all the time. I'm a mixture or ratio of both. And sometimes the space can be more, have more movement, like this piece right here with the water churning around me. And sometimes it can be more calm, like the piece here, where there's not as much movement. So I feel like sometimes I'm just trying to hold on to my experience at the time. So I've shifted to doing some bigger pieces and adding some more symbolism. So this piece at the left here, I combined the cranes and the clouds to show more movement and to show the importance of clouds and cranes. So cranes are representative of long life, and the clouds are symbols of being auspicious. They're an auspicious symbol, meaning you're close to the heavens, you're close to the gods. And so I like to use that oftentimes in my work, because am I close to, am I trying to elevate myself in terms of my status and my appearance, or my who I am? And thinking about how to utilize all these different parts together to create a different mood. So I feel like this one has more of a calmness to it in combination with the symbols. This is a piece that's in the show, coming into being. This one is influenced after the fact of kind of me rising from the waters, almost like Botticelli's Venus, to where she is, the birth of Venus. And you don't necessarily even see my face. It's still a self-portrait of me, but you can see that I'm coming, rising from the water. And to reinforce that, I go ahead and put in the water lilies and thinking about, what kind of mood do I want to portray. So this one is really a movement and upward growth, whereas this one here, Shield, is very, I think, abrasive. Everything is totally covered up. I'm covering up my face. There is the grid work is very pointy and jagged, and then you've got these smoke, the green smoke or fog that's covering me up. So this one is supposed to have more of a feeling of protecting myself or hiding myself from the world. This one's more of an interpretation of maybe idolization or self-importance, especially incorporating, those are peacock feathers that I put around my head, but you could also infer that that could be a halo or some kind of saintly religious iconography. Oftentimes I will find an image of myself or take a picture of myself, figure out what I want to cut the paper cut out of, whether it be a print or a paper or some kind of special paper, and then I incorporate different symbols, and that really color choices and then symbols really integrate that. And then last part of the series that I have there, as these are called my superstition series. So this is an actual print of my face, but you can't necessarily see my face. And instead I put different superstitions or different types of symbols that I find really interesting. So the one on the left is called Tigress, because I was born in the year of the tiger. And so I like that fierce symbol, someone that is has a strong confidence. And then to some extent, I also make it tongue in cheek, because sometimes we joke that I'm a tiger mom. I'm not that bad of a tiger mom, but sometimes I joke that I'm a tiger mom. So I like to use the tiger as a symbol. And the symbol on the right is a snake. And I call it beautiful snake because is that a positive or a negative rendering of me, as a female? Is a snake something that is meant to be adored or is something to be perhaps feared? So that's really a lot of my artwork talking about portraiture. Thank you.
So are there any questions? No? Okay. So Tammy, I want to thank you again for being present and giving a presentation for our high school art day. And if there aren't any other questions, I suppose that's it for today. For those of you who are here for my art appreciation class and for extra credit for my other art history classes, the code word is art. So have a good weekend and thank you for coming.